So before we get started, if you want a chance to win a custom PC, there's a League of Legends PC giveaway happening right now that you can enter for free from this video sponsor, Signal RGB. Now it's made to look just like the Nexus. The crystal is surrounded by an infinity mirror, and it can be lifted up to reveal all of your components inside. So we've got a 3070 Ti graphics card with an 11900K processor, 32 gigs of RAM, and a 1TB SSD. All of the RGB lighting is fully customizable with the Signal RGB application, which controls and syncs RGB devices from any brand. If you're interested in winning the giveaway, I'll have a link in the video description below. Let's start off with the case in this build, because it's the newest and honestly one of the most exciting pieces of the build. This is the CH160, a new ITX case from Deepcool. And one of its big highlights here is the inclusion of a handle that gives it a very Lunchbox-like look, which I think is quite cool. I have built a few Lunchbox-styled cases in the past, but none have brought this level of compatibility at this low of a price. This honestly might be my favorite budget ITX case to date. Mesh on 5 sides with a tempered glass side panel, no need to account for the additional cost of a riser cable as the GPU is plugged directly into the motherboard. We can fit a 3-slot GPU. This case actually officially supports 305mm, but we can push that a bit further with some patience. We've also got massive air cooling support, fantastic build quality, and room for an ATX power supply. That last one comes with a major asterisk that we'll need to talk about later on before you go and plan all your parts. The powder-coated steel is very rigid, with minimum flexing. You would have to deliberately be trying to bend a panel in order to do it. The panel gaps are nice and even on all the sides, my unit at least, and all of the pieces are secured well at multiple points, so there's nothing that feels loose or rattles around when I'm carrying it by the handle. Which, by the way, also feels absolutely solid. It's secured with 4 screws to the top panel, so you could remove it if you wanted to, but that handle itself is made of a very durable feeling plastic along the top and a slightly softer plastic underneath that makes it more comfortable in your hand. So let's get this case ready for some components. We just have 2 screws holding in each of the side panels. Once those are removed, we can set them aside. Can also remove the top panel with 4 screws, and that's 2 on each side as well. Now under the top panel here, there's 2 fan brackets that go across. Depending on what kind of components you go with, you could fit 2 120mm fans here. With the parts I've chose, we won't be able to fit those, so I'll just be putting them to the side for now. Now, as for the components, I'm going to be starting off with the CPU. I'll be going with the AMD 7600. This is a $200 CPU and considered a good entry point into the AM5 platform. Now, this is a CPU that I already own, but if I was buying one new right now, the 7600X has been frequently on sale for only $10 more. I think that one is definitely worth taking a look at if the lower pricing is still available, especially because we can easily cool it with the massive air cooling support that we have in this case, because that X variant does come at a higher 105 watt TDP compared to the 65 watts on the non-X. Now, if you are planning to do more CPU intensive tasks and productivity work, then it might be worth stepping it up to a 7700X, but for a pure gaming machine, the 7600 is a good choice. Now, as far as motherboards go, this is a new one for me. This is the Gigabyte A620i AX. And for the most part, I recommend a B-series board to most people, as those typically have a good balance between price and features, but this board genuinely surprised me. First of all, I think it's a pretty good looking board with some decent VRM heatsinks. It doesn't have any loud or weird designs that some companies think gamers want for some reason. There's also multiple fan headers that we'll be taking advantage of. There's USB 3.2, USB Type-C headers, and dual channel memory support up to 6400 MHz. But that does come with some sacrifices. There's only room for a single M.2 drive, where I'll be plugging a 1TB Crucial P3+. And you do get built-in Wi-Fi 6E, so honestly, a very balanced board in my opinion, and definitely one that I'll be using more often. It's also much less expensive than other AM5 ITX boards at $140, but I've seen this thing as low as $120, so keep your eye out on Amazon if you're looking for one. For RAM, we're going with 32 gigs of DDR5 6000, as that's the recommended speed for AM5. Anything past that will generally be a waste if you're building a machine for gaming specifically. However, there can be some benefits when going faster if you are doing productivity work. This set I have here is from Team Group, and they're lower profile, so we shouldn't have any clearance problems with our CPU cooler, and they're a very good looking set, if aesthetics are important to you. Now that we have those clicked into place, let's install our CPU cooler. So this case can support a cooler up to 172mm in height, which is pretty insane and opens up a lot of options. Now I decided on the AK620 digital from Deepcool. This one is 162mm in height, so we can take advantage of the available space with a little extra to spare. And with this case having a tempered glass side panel, I thought it'd be a nice touch to use the digital version for that extra utility. As far as cooling performance goes, I mean, this is definitely overkill for a 65 watt 7600. Gaming temps are sitting in the mid to low 50s after an hour of playing Horizon Forbidden West. That's at 1440p and maxed out settings. And then in the low 60s with Cyberpunk 2077 in 4K. So absolutely no problems keeping things cool. I should note that these temps are taken with the completed build, which includes 2 case fans that intake fresh airflow from the front, directs it through the cooler, and then exhausts it from the rear case fan at the back, with the tempered glass side panel installed. Installation is also really simple. We just replace the default mounts with the ones in the box, remove the middle fan, apply some thermal paste, then lower the cooler onto the CPU, aligning it with those mounts. Then we can screw in each side a few rotations at a time until tightened. So once that's there, we can plug in the USB and fan connectors. And that's the motherboard prep, so we can actually start moving everything over into the case. First, let's grab our I/O shield and pop that in. Then we can lower the motherboard, aligning it with the 4 standoffs and secure it. So pretty straightforward so far. The front I/O plate is detachable as well, which is going to make it a lot easier to install the rest of our components. The next thing I want to take a look at here is the power supply. So first, there's a small bracket at the top that can be used in 2 different positions. The default is for the power supply to be positioned towards the back, and that leaves enough room for a 120 fan at the front. Or you can move that small bracket to the second position, which allows you to fit an SFX or ATX power supply up to 140 millimeters in length at the front. So while you can fit a 140 millimeter ATX power supply here, it will limit the GPU clearance. So if you have a GPU that exceeds 230 millimeters in length, then you're not going to be able to fit it along with the power supply. Now, I have seen some builds online doing it with what look to be custom cables. The very flexible custom cables that I have still didn't allow enough room to plug in a 4070 Super, at least in my build. So you would probably still need some lower profile connectors or something. But honestly, at that point, I would just go with an SFX or an SFXL power supply so that you don't have to take on the additional cost of the custom cables and still potentially put pressure on your GPU. And then save the front of the case for an extra fan. So don't expect to get any 140 millimeter power supply and be able to use it with the cables out of the box if you have a dedicated GPU that is going to extend beneath it. Anyways, let's just pivot here and go with the tried and true SF750. Now I'm actually going to plug in the giant 24-pin motherboard cable and the CPU cable to the board first with the power supply out of the case because it's just gonna start getting tight in here. Now we can install that front fan and plug that in. And while we're here, let's also plug in the case cables. So that's the front panel connectors, USB-C, USB 3.0, and the HD audio. Then we can secure the SF750 with 4 screws. Now officially, this case supports a GPU up to 305 millimeters in length, which is also the exact length of my Asus TUF 4070 Ti Super. And yeah, it drops in here with no problems. But I couldn't help but to notice that this was almost too easy. There's at least another 5 to 10 millimeters of space in here. So I also decided to try out a Founders Edition card, which is 310 millimeters in length. Now, it doesn't fit if you are just dropping it in straight down like I was doing with the 4070 Ti Super, because the lip on the front and the back panels get in the way. But if you remove the CPU cooler, you can work it in at an angle and it does fit with a few millimeters of space to spare. So this is really awesome to see. I think it'd be pretty sick to do a 4090 build in this one day. But today I wanted to use a newer card that I haven't built with yet, and that's the 4070 Super. So specifically, this is the Asus Dual 4070 Super. It's a 2.5 slot card, and as the name implies, it uses a dual fan cooling system. I actually really like the design quite a lot. There's a white line design that extends to the metal backplate where there's also a cutout for some extra airflow. Now, 2.5 slots, so it is taller than a Founders 4070 or 4070 Super, meaning it won't fit into some of the smaller cases like the Velka 5 and the 7, but it's by no means a giant card relative to what we see today, and it will easily fit into this case we're using today. A high refresh rate 1440p monitor would make a good fit here, but this card can absolutely handle 4K gaming as well. I've seen it hit 4K 60 in a few graphically demanding titles that I was playing around with. Now, this is using the default performance BIOS, but there is also a quiet BIOS mode if you wanted, quieter operation. Although I can't say that I felt the need to make that switch because the complete system noise is only 42 decibels under a full gaming load, which in my opinion is basically unnoticeable. The overbelt cooling system on the card is also effective at keeping the temps in the mid 60s after an hour of playing Horizon Forbidden West, and that's at maxed out settings in 4K. Same when playing Cyberpunk 2077 in 4K with the Ray Tracing Ultra preset. So now let's grab our 4070 Super, lower it into the case, aligning it with the PCI Express slot and plug that in. Then we can secure it. Okay, with everything installed, let's resecure that front IO plate. We also need to plug in the power extension cable, which routes across the top and through a hole on the back. From there, it just kind of hangs out. So this is a bit different, but there are cable tie-off points on the back that secure it tighter to the case if you wanted to. And thinking about it, this is a better solution than potentially sacrificing the component compatibility or the overall size to have it internally. So with that out of the way, we can resecure the top and side panels. And I also realized that I forgot to install that last rear fan before the GPU. So let's get that plugged in. And with that, the build is complete. So I genuinely kind of love this case. It has absolutely solid build quality. I personally like the aesthetic and the overall simplistic design. It's easy to build in, there's no riser cable needed, it can support large GPUs up to a Founders Edition 4090, it has massive air cooling support, and most of all, it's only $70. That's a great price, especially in the world of small form factor and ITX cases where you pay a premium for almost everything. You will absolutely see this case on the channel for some more budget builds in the future. Thanks for watching.